Welcome to this panel, The Legacy of 1968, organised by the Wellington chapter of the Platypus Affiliated Society. Before we begin, I'll introduce Platypus. So we're an educational organisation established in 2006 that organises reading groups, public fora, research and journalism focused on the problems and tasks inherited from the old, the 1920s to 30s, the new, the 1960s and 70s, and the post-political 1980s to 90s left, for the possibilities of emancipatory politics today. And here in Wellington, we organise coffee breaks every second Friday at 6 p.m. That's over at Midnight Espresso on Cuba Street. So these are like casual, unstructured discussions about contemporary events and about the left. So if you're interested in that, come along. We're also going to be starting a reading group later on in the year, reading primary texts from Marxism and from bourgeois philosophy and the new left as well. So if you're interested in us, there's a sheet in there you can sign up, put your email in and join our mailing list, or follow us on Instagram. So that's us. I'll start introducing the panelists. So from my left, at the end there, we have Sue Bradford. Sue was an activist, academic and former Green Party MP. She first participated in the left in Aotearoa during the period of anti-Vietnam War protests of the late 1960s and has been involved in various groups on the left since. She currently works as coordinator for Kotari Research and Education for Social Change. Then we have Toby. Toby is a historian specialising in labour history and social movements in New Zealand. Toby has authored several works on the New Zealand New Left and was one of the first to use that term in relation to New Zealand movements. Then here we have Quinn. Quinn, he is a Marxist, a chef and an activist who organises many hopu, including Poneki Anti-Fascist Coalition. And then here we have Jackson, who is an anarchist, communist and trade unionist. And I'll just read out the prompt that the panelists are responding to. The 1960s were a period of social upheaval that spanned the entire globe. The new left that emerged reached for Marxism to help it navigate the politics of this decade. Platypus asks, how was this Marxism inherited and transformed? Did it succeed or discover new problems? Today, with activists fighting in the streets and calling for liberation along the lines of race, gender and sexuality, the left's every attempt to discover new methods and new ideas seems to invoke a memory of the political horizons of the new left. We can perhaps more than ever feel the urgency of the question, what lessons are to be drawn from the new left as another generation undertakes the project of building a left for the 21st century. And to begin with, the panelists are going to have around 8 minutes to respond to that prompt. Then they're going to respond to each other, and then they'll hear from you, the audience, in the Q&A. So we'll start with Jackson.
Is that audible? Kia ora, I'm Jackson. I want to first apologise because I'm not a historian of the New Left, and I'm definitely not old enough to be around during it. So all I really have are reckons, but I also wanted to possibly relate the history a little bit to what it's like to become, or to like join the left in the 2020s or the 2010s. So I'm just gonna read, I guess, more or less. So the workers' movement in New Zealand was historically constituted first by mass employment in the docks and in the industry related to exploiting dairy and meat. And then later in large factories produced by the Labour Party intervention in the economy. And in most of the rest of the world, the working class first came from an independent political force, which was slowly incorporated into the state via a series of different processes. So in some countries it took the form of social democracy or state socialism and fascism and anti-fascism in other countries. And so this integration then reaches a crisis in the 1960s and 70s as the decade of the rank and file rebellion. Am I echoing too much? I feel. Where workers reject elements of the compromise, like the arbitration court and the union bureaucracy. But also the people who are being excluded from the social democratic compromise. So women, black people in the United States, migrant workers in various countries, but obviously failed to overcome that contradiction and produce communism, I guess. And at the same time, it was undermined by economic conditions within capitalism. So the offshoring of mass manufacturing to the global south, and particularly to East Asia, but also restructuring in industry that decimated employment. And also, lastly, in New Zealand in the 80s and 90s, by the bourgeoisie reneging on its part of the deal, particularly through the ECA. But in New Zealand, the working class was almost immediately incorporated into capitalism after the 1890 maritime strike, which produced the arbitration system. And so what you have instead of the process of slow integration is more a series of rebellions out from this compromise. So first, the syndicalist movement around 1913, and later in the 1930s, and then finally largest in the 1970s. And so that's sort of the context that the 1970s rebellion happens in, much more continuous than a break, and much more similar to what had happened previously to what is happening now. And the turn to industry basically began from the essentially correct conclusion that workers have the most power under capitalism when they withdraw their labor from work. However, it was undermined, obviously, by the fact that the working class, at the very moment they were doing this, was being decomposed and reconstituted. So, it was a bit of a failure, I guess. But then to turn to what the relevance of this period is to people now, I think I, like most people of my generation, was probably politicized online in quite an individualized and atomistic way in a small town where I perceived there to be no politics or socialism. And then so when I moved to Wellington, I thought of Wellington as a place where there are socialists, which, maybe I'll get involved in that or whatever. When I got here, my perception was that most of these socialists were inward-facing, and I've come to think basing their strategies on an earlier period when there was naturally existing workers' movement. So most strategies today are designed to win the leadership of the class from labourism, that's my perception, or possibly like now Green Party liberals. Except that working class really no longer exists. There are, of course, green shoots. There's still mass manufacturing in East Asia, and there's mass employment in healthcare, education, and logistics. So I think leftists today need to start from a position of humility and essentially starting from square one, because there is no existing workers' movement, I suppose. That's what I have to say, really. Do you want to just move along? Well, I could probably just speak like this, and people can probably hear me at the back. I don't know.
No, it's for the Zoom. That's all right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Called Quinn aho. I come from a trade union tradition in my family. I'm from the UK. My mum's a musician, and I was hearing about the union politics and shenanigans the whole time I was growing up. Never occurred to me not to be involved in the left, and I was involved already in leafleting and canvassing for the UK Labour Party, which they're gross, I know, I was 16. But I got started there and have only shifted further and further to the left as I've grown up. I put myself down, I identify as a Marxist from the point of view of I guess my self-education in the political sphere has come from analysing economics. I have also thought about describing myself as an anarcho-communist, and in the most spaces that I've been in, that seems to be a dichotomy that people don't think fits. But there we go, I'm here, and that is how I labelled myself for the purposes of today. I obviously also am not old enough to have been part of the New Left. I got involved in these spaces really only in the last 4 years, but it has been a real privilege working with a lot of our elder activists and people far more experienced than myself to learn from. I think it's absolutely huge, such an important element of what we do. I organise with a lot of different groups in Wellington. I'm here representing Quinn Anti-Fascist Coalition, but I have also worked with Queer Endurance and Defiance, Justice for Palestine, Occupy Brandon Street, lots of other groups. I think what I want to talk about mostly, to start with, is the idea that the New Left really was the beginning of a lot of movements to do with personal liberty. And that is, aside from, historically that is what is true, it's also very much the perception of left movements in that era. It's what is portrayed in movies, in TV, etc. You've got the gay rights movement, Stonewall in the US. So many of those movements are about the liberty of the individual. And I guess I'm jumping straight into, criticism of the New Left. Broadly, the American New Left and how it was corrupted by capitalism. Because the idea of the liberty of the individual has really fed into libertarianism and then into neoliberalism. I think the loss of the idea of class consciousness and solidarity and intersectionality between all of the various minorities who need to be defended was lost, and the structures that are in place in the West and the US with capitalism co-opted the idea of liberty of the individual and really has led us to a place where we're really divided. And it is the idea of free speech and freedom is used to divide people now in the mainstream, not to unite people. I think what we really need to do as a newest left, the contemporary 2020s left, whatever we will be called eventually by historians, we need to focus on unity. And I think there is often too much argument between people on the left. I know we love to argue. Arguing is important, but we can't let that divide us when we need to be working together on common causes. I think a lot of our work needs to be focused on the cause and the goal, and not on ideology. We can argue about ideology in the pub afterwards, but we need to get down to our work and our mahi and get things done. Thanks.
So my name's Toby. So by the end of the 1990s, I was radicalised we did big occupations of registry buildings and campuses at Toby University. Thousands of people were involved in the occupation. And out of that was a bunch of Māori land occupations about the fiscal envelope as well at the same time. But very soon after I got involved in many different left groups, But there was very little activism, sort of things completely petered out. This was late 90s. And there were very few people from the older generation from the new left around. I met a few of them, like here at Wellington, Jim Delahunty, anybody remembers him, was around, but very few. So I wrote a thesis, a research in the left country to find out that was sort of the far last time, the last big upsurge of the left was popular, and it's often winning. And the new left did win a lot, particularly troops out of Vietnam, stopping the tour to South Africa when it was under apartheid, stopping a military base in the South Island, an American military base, and so forth. So they had a lot of little wins. But anyway, so I want to start with a guy called Bruce Jessen, who's the premier new left theoretician in this country. I assume people have read his work. So he believed the protest movement and the new left by extension, and he was a new leftist himself, was not new. It was dominated by the middle class. It was single issue. It was very white dominated. He didn't mention this, but very patriarchal dominated, very male dominated. And it was full of moral outrage. So it was a very moralistic movement that had sort of black and white and reacting against the authoritarian and conservative status quo is epitomised by somebody like Robert Muldoon, who was a sort of Trump-like conservative populist rather than prime minister from 74 to 84, but he was around in politics for a long time. So, and Jessen believed that the new left moved away from class. And a foreshadowing of neoliberalism and its individualism. But I think this is one strand of the new left. So this is what's called the early new left. This is what the new left that came out in 1956. I'll come back to that soon. But so what happened was he's part of the Frankfurt School of Western Marxism. That's where he came from. And so the Frankfurt School, it's not new, it's something developed in the 1920s and 30s, and they're basically arguing that the working class is pretty much authoritarian and conservative. It's been written off, and they want to stress hegemony, the hegemony of capitalism. So they want to study how the sort of cultural, ideological, economic artifice, how it controls workers. So that's where Jessen's coming from. So that's one strand of the new left, the early new left. Here's a later one. And the other strand of the early new left is people like E.B. Thompson. People have heard of him. He's a famous historian in the UK. He wrote many important books, and he's completely the opposite of version of Marxism. And also, he was arguing that the working class has got tremendous agency, capability, creativity, and fights back all the time, and remakes itself. It gets remade all the time, but it's remakes itself. She wrote the book, Making the Working Class, Capitalism Common. Great books, you should read them. And this started this history from below. So you see straight away, the new left in the early 1950s and early 60s was actually some of them were going away from class, the Frankfurt School, and others were actually going towards it straight away. And this replicated in this country as well. And the other tradition, of course, that went to the working class in the early new left was the Italian tradition of Peter Ismo, and then became sort of Thomas Marxism later, which comes a bit strange. But there's another strand that maybe nobody's heard of, but it's quite important as well. So to talk about the early new left, it starts in 1956. So in 1956 you have the invasion, so you have a big uprising, the workers' uprising in Hungary. So the tanks roll in, crush it from Stalinist USSR. There's one, so the whole of people, the communist parties around the world, split off from the new left and try to reappraise the left. So this is the first thing that happened. And the other thing that happened was Khrushchev, who was the leader, I can't remember the official title, of USSR, revealing Stalin's brutality. And so this was another reason why the new left was formed. So it's refugees from the old left forming a new left, right? And that happened here too. A lot of people left the Communist Party and formed a new left, right? And so there's lots of things. So the early new left was, I'm trying to do history in 5 minutes here. It was called the socialism of magazines, very theoretical, but wasn't activist. So they formed lots of discussion groups, and I think the current left today, the far left today, is often doing that. Like I think the Socialist Society is equivalent of groups like the Socialist Forum in this country. And so they tended to be, so the defining feature of the new left otherwise is trying to find a third way away from social democracy, the Labour Party when it was social democrat, and away from Stalinism, and away from the Cold War blocks of USA and USSR, right? So it's trying to find a new left, right? So that's what's called new. Yet, the first new left basically was an independent lobby group on the Labour Party trying to force it to the left, right? So it really didn't transcend social democracy in my opinion. So that's why I'm critical of it, right? So it's just, trying to extend the welfare state, extend the class compromise, have a bit better slice of the pie. Now, the later new left is much more action oriented. This comes in with 1968. You have the big French Rebellion, big World War Rebellion, and then some people think revolution's on the cards, or some people do. And it's driven sometimes by students, but workers are a key component, and also lots of, African Americans and the anti-colonial struggle happening at the same time. And so it's a much more, and people think that things can change. People get radicalised. There's a bunch of creative activism happening all around the world, around Vietnam War, etc., etc., etc. Lots of sit-ins, lots of new forms of struggle, right? And so this goes away from theories. The new left becomes much more action oriented. So in this country, we have like the progressive youth movements. There's a video documentary you should watch called Rebels in Retrospect, which is I think online about the progressive youth movement, pretty purely. And then the resistance talk shops is another one. Another one is the People's Union, which is very interesting because it's really, they go into working class communities and try and serve the poor. Was the idea. The idea, and they actually did heaps of real, support for working class people. What other ones were there? Polynesian Panthers, of course, in this country, and Black Panther Party in the US. So that they're about community control. So all these groups, and then another one, Ngā and all these groups are, I think, the key thing is they're seeking control, workers' control, student worker control, community control of their own communities. And that's one key aspect of this later new left, is sort of seeking what I would call self-management. I think that's pretty universal. I think some people dispute that, but I think that's overall sort of one of the key aims of the new left. The other thing about the new left we need to understand is they're very non-sectarian. They're eclectic. So you'll have people who are basically left-wing social democrats all the way through to people who are basically into the old left, but a new version of it. And you'll have some Maoists and Trotskyists, so there's some council communists and anarchists, people just radicals. And I think to understand the new left in this country, you look at that video or Bullshit and Jelly Beans by Tim Chabot. If you read that book, it sort of sums up, I think, the Auckland protests sitting at that time. And because it was written by many people, right? Not just Tim Chabot. But if you read that, it gives you a good idea about it. I think that's all I need to say. I think one other thing is that the early New Left 56 was formed during the long boom. So workers had it really good economically. There was full employment, for example, which is quite amazing. Yet in 1968, that long boom collapses. Right? So you have a prolonged period of economic crisis, much like today. You stagflation, little or no growth, things are getting worse, cost of living crisis. And that turns people towards more of a class perspective, I think, in the later New Left. I can speak about that later, but I think we've enough time already, so that's me.
Kia ora koutou. Benji, can I just ask if you knock it on the head for me if I go on too long, because there's a risk of being the old person. And the only one that actually was there, I have to say it's very funny hearing Toby talk about our time. Yeah, that's quite amusing and interesting to hear other people's and later generations' perspectives. But first of all, thank you to Platypus and Wellington for inviting me down here. I've come all the way from north of Auckland. It's quite a long trip on a Saturday afternoon, but I just value any opportunity that's created for debate on the left, because we have nowhere near enough of it, by people who are serious about and thinking about where we've come from, what's gone wrong, what's gone right, but also where are we going. Whatever age we are, it's critical, these kind of debates. So kia ora to Platypus Wellington and from Porniki, and to kia ora to comrades and friends here who I've known in other times. The last thing I want to say in the beginning is I don't know how many people here even knew Roger Fowler, who was an activist of my generation, a little bit older than me, in Auckland. But we had his funeral on Wednesday this past week. And it was 4 hours long. The compere said it was the same length as Tim Shadbox. And it was just such an honouring of a life of commitment and activism from when he was very young right through to the moment he died, and so many different groups. But he was a communist, he was absolutely dedicated to serve the people and to doing that in his own community in Māori and South Auckland, but also very involved in struggles of solidarity. For example, in recent years, very active in organising New Zealand's contribution to the Palestine flotilla and things like that. Anyway, I'd just like to honour Roger and actually say how being at that celebration of his life really put me in mind of what we're doing here today. So yes, I was there. When Benji said this is about the spirit of '68, I took that really literally. I first got involved actively in politics in 1967 as a 15-year-old school kid at Auckland Girls Grammar. My girlfriend and I went and asked if we could join the Communist Party. We knocked on their door because we were absolutely wanted to change the world and learn. We were told, of course, we were far too young to do anything like that, but they invited us to join the Progressive Youth Movement, PYM. And so from Auckland Girls, we went straight into the executive and the organising of PYM in Auckland. And also into Communist Party, which was a Maoist Communist Party then, straight into Communist Party study groups. So that's for the first couple of years of my political life, that was where I got my political education from, far more than I even did from university or anywhere else. So that's where I started, was with what I guess you call the old left, but just at a time when it was transitioning in the way that Toby's just talked about. And my own political life has built from that time. By the time I started uni when I was 16, and after I'd been there for a bit, I rejected what I saw as totalitarian one-way street Maoism, even though I'd learned a lot from that, and moved on to being part of the first group that set up Resistance Bookshop in Auckland, which was a collective where 12 of us lived. We had a meeting space, 12 of us lived there. We had meetings, we had a bookshop, sold progressive literature, we had a printing press in the basement, we had a photo developing studio in the basement, so we could print. Print was no internet. Printing was the tool. And much part of the networks of Tim Shadbolt, Roger Fowler and others around the city at that time. I moved on, so I went from PYM to Resistance. I was in the group that set up whole racist tours on campus. And I was and was part of a whole lot of other groups, including the groups supporting around Ngā Tāmatoa. The question was raised, what is or was the New Left? That's a huge question, and I haven't academically studied it or even theoretically studied it. When I was around in '68, it seemed very highly theoretical to me and distant, like the writings of Herbert Macusa and Regis de Bray, I guess, were some of the theoreticians that were most popular in the groups I was in. But that was all beyond me. I was much more interested in the praxis, what we were turning Marxism into practicality on the ground, as the young people here are talking about. I was you then, maybe even younger. And we were also very conscious of being part of riding this crest of revolution from all around the world. We marched the streets, London, Paris, West Berlin. Graham might remember this. The age of, I don't like to assume the age of others here, but Paris, London, West Berlin, Vietnam War win. We were so conscious of being part of the end of the Vietnam War movement, of trying to bring New Zealand troops out of Vietnam, of seeing people our age or not much older being sent off, going off to that war, and of our support for US imperialism. So it was all very, very real and very in our face, and we resisted it with everything we had. But that sense that all around the world, I mean, when I think of '68, I can't help thinking of Paris, of the barricades and the inspiration of Danny the Red and the other fighters we saw there, but also around the whole globe. I was also, even then, and still am, so humbled and conscious that in this country, being a militant activist was much, much safer than being that in many, many other places. I know, and I knew then, that I probably would have been dead by the time I was 16 or 17 if I'd been in many of the other countries where this was happening. So I felt in this country we sometimes don't realise that the advantage we have of not going out on the streets to be killed, or in our homes being dragged out to be killed, or sent to jail for long periods or tortured. And I think that's something to bear in mind when we feel afraid of doing X, Y and Z. A few of the biggest lessons for me from that early time where that theory is important, and I never regret the times I've spent then or since learning different theories and reading or hearing different thinkers, because that's so important. But equally important is to learn from practice, to keep learning from our mistakes, recognising our mistakes, because we always make them. And that, as I think Lenin said once, in a way, in our lives of trying to make change, we are rehearsing and living the change we want to make. And I'm so conscious of that. So you go into it with eyes wide open. When I was really young, I was just listening. I didn't talk very much. I'm very conscious of my age, just listened, learnt, and gradually started to act. One of my biggest learnings when I was young, I was first arrested when I was 16 and then beaten up and arrested again when I was 17 in a really frightening demonstration. That second time I was put into prison, into the cells overnight with some Māori what we used to call shippies, ship girls. And those ship girls probably taught me as much as I ever learned. They just said, I was sitting there crying, like, why am I locked up? This isn't fair, or whatever. I've been beaten up by the cops all this nice party hard kid. Anyway, they said, look, stop your crying. What are you on about? This is our lives. Whose side are you on? And that night, which was a really stark night, I thought, I know whose side I'm on. Is it with the Māori ship girls? Or it's with these bastards that have put me here? So that's where I started in some ways. And when all those men around me who seemed really old at that time, maybe 19, 20, 21, the old men, they were having big arguments about theory. But what happened about for us girls, for us women, what happened for people that weren't straight? I wasn't straight either. Like what we were, the old communists were very puritanical, very conservative. No sex, drugs or rock and roll unless you were married. Anyway, and none of the queer stuff, or we used to call it gay. Well, where was the space for us? So gradually, I took part in the first women's liberation group in Auckland Uni, the first gay liberation group in Auckland Uni, and there's other whole stories that derive from that. And sometimes I hear that criticism, that was just identity politics, and it's just identity politics, but no, that was, unless women and queer people and all of us are part of a revolution, what revolution are we talking about? I get the last point from that early time, I guess, that I was thinking about again lately, is how the need to be careful around militancy. I was in almost the most militant streams of the left in progressive youth movement. There was some, this is public, but there were people that were even more so. Some of my friends went to jail for bombing sites and similar actions. And I guess I made a choice then that really one has to face what is the true situation in this country now. In 1969, 1970 was Aotearoa in a revolutionary situation. Some people thought so. Some people were basically taking our version of arms up against the state. But I did not think, as others around me, did not think that it was the time. But that was part of the milieu in which we operated. There were people storing arms, there were people bombing things. And I made a choice. If in this country we could have a shot at making revolution or a form of transformation, going beyond capitalism in a way that didn't involve killing people, that would be really good. And that's what I'll try to do. And I've probably hit my 8 minutes at least right now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we'll just give all the panelists a chance to respond to each other now, so around 2 minutes each. So,
I don't really have any thoughts yet. I might stir a bit. Does anyone else have anything to say? Or
So what comes to mind?
what does come to mind? Nothing, unfortunately. I don't know. It's very interesting to hear what Sue has to say, because obviously everything now is like at such a lower level, like there's very little happening in general. And it's interesting to hear Toby say a similar thing, because one of the most formative political experiences for me was Students Against Cults, which is that's like a pale imitation of the sort of things that were happening at universities in the 90s. So yeah, it just doesn't, I don't know what to take from that, but yeah, it's just not particularly. Yeah, I'm sorry, I just don't have much to say, but yeah, does anyone else? Yeah.
I guess firstly, thank you for your mahi over the years. It's really, really cool to be in the same space as activists like yourself. And thank you for highlighting the feminist elements of the movement back then. I think it's really, really important. One of the criticisms that I have, I guess, of not the New Left specifically, but of, I guess, the transition from the New Left to where we are now is, I think we haven't centered enough how much the patriarchy is the root of so many of the evils we are fighting at the moment. And in fact, when I was researching the New Left internationally, I could only find one female name who was among the really prominent figures, and that was Angela Davis. Just a hell of a lot of white men, of which I am one, but for my sins. And I also just wanted to say, yeah, on privilege of the safety we have in Aotearoa, relatively speaking, I think possibly we have a duty to go harder, given the relative safety that we have. Not necessarily all of us, those of us who have the privileges of white skin, for example. Given that there are comrades internationally who are in much less safe positions, maybe I wouldn't say maybe we're too complacent, maybe we're too cautious.
I forgot to say something at the start, and it is that I'm an outsider to the New Left, and I researched it. I interviewed a bunch of new leftists, right, way back in the late 90s. So that's where I got a lot of my information from. I'm reading everything, but it's still very much an outsider viewpoint. Different generation completely, right? And just for the record, Roger Fowler was the founder of the Ponzi People's Union. And then he went to Mungo, community centre here. So it was an amazingly successful working class community, but it was possibly one working class back in the 70s, believe it or not. What else could I add? I could say something about personal liberty. I do think the New Left had a different strain as well. It wasn't just countercultural or about personal liberty, but also had a big social strain. They rejected that. So they had an internal tension and lots of critiques going on. And a lot of people saw personal liberties tied up into collective liberty. So there was that as well. What else should I say? I just want to say something briefly about the terms of industry, because I wrote an article in a journal called Labour History in Australia. I made this claim that the New Left wasn't successful, but I think it was. But I'm writing a book currently about strikes in Aotearoa in the 70s and 80s. And so many of the people who overturned unions, made them much more left-wing, much more activist, struck a lot and did a lot of amazing things, were from that new left milieu. They went into unions and overturned them completely. So you had a whole bunch of conservative unions, like say the clerical workers, cleaners, all sorts of unions. Graham could talk about the culture of it. So many unions were overturned in the 70s from below, and leadership were replaced and they became much more active. And the New Left were at the forefront of that in alliance with unruly workers. And so it was quite successful. And it was completely decimated, well, not completely, but largely decimated in values by the restructuring decomposition. So that's one thing that was one of the legacies of the New Left. They did turn to industry and turn to class. So they weren't all anti-class as well. There was always this so the New Left was really contradictory and, had many different strands and they were arguing with each other and so forth. I think that's one thing to understand about the New Left. There was so many different strands. If you argue the New Left, would say it was essentially anti-vanguardist, there were actually vanguardist elements in the New Left, or, you could go through any defining characteristic of the New Left and find other groups in the New Left that completely oppose that. So it was really, really broad. But they were united in what they were fighting against, right? Rather than what they were for, right? But here's an actual New Leftist. Don't listen to me.
So interesting, everybody hearing the different perspectives. I'll respond first to Toby. Earlier on, you made the statement that New Left was non-sectarian, but I think you may have just contradicted to that yourself. Because actually, how are you defining if you're a sectarian splits from that were in front of me, I was part of from the moment I was part of the Left? How would we define that? Right through the 60s, late 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And in fact, that plethora of organisations we had, say, in the 70s and 80s, you've written about this, the unemployed movement that I was part of, and the sectarian fighting and inter-union fighting that was part of the unemployed workers movement fighting. Incredible step left politics. But that very diversity and the fact we came to a whole lot of different communistic and anarchistic groupings meant that there was a vibrancy that we don't have now. You can regret, I do regret a lot of sectarianism, and I did a lot in the unemployed movement to try and overcome that. And I'm still trying to overcome it with a project I'm in Auckland at the moment called the Socialist Library Project, where we're bringing together quite a few different elements, people that from different left, communistic, anarchist, socialist groupings, to have a common library. We've got the little the red kiwi, what do you call it?
It's upstairs.
Upstairs here, which I'm dying to look at because you're like a sister library to us.
Yeah, it's not open very often. But
yeah, we've got our little library growing. It was quite a big project group in Auckland, but we've got elements from right across the left step backgrounds, and a lot of young people as well as us old folks. So that's what I did to overcome sectarianism, but I don't know if we have any current or former Trotskyists in the room. But I'll never forget in Resistance Bookshop in, would have been 1969, 70, there was this chap called Owen Gauger who was a Spartacist.
Yeah.
And he started off with 3 people, and they used to go to the pub. And then it got down to one person, him. And he just had his little office which was in the corridor of the bookshop, just for him, all on his own. And to me that kind of epitomised where Trotskyism often ended up just splitting. I've never been part of that stream, but yes, the sectarianism was there. The second point I wanted to pick up was when Jackson, you talked about there is no existing workers' movement. How can you say that? When you're a proud United delegate. We've got the private sector unions like first, workers first and then too, and Unite, really doing your best to build and represent strongly your workers, your members. And I see up in Auckland the struggles of Indian and Filipino workers, the struggles to defend the Uber drivers. How can you say there's no workers' movement? I don't know, maybe you can answer
Can I
that.
respond to that? Or is that how that works?
Yeah.
Is it on? Or?
I don't really want 2 mics on though. Just
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Maybe to clarify, I'm happy to be wrong about this, but what I meant more was that it's not that like class struggle is not going on, because class struggle is like an inherent feature of capitalism that can't go away, but more that there is no like you're talking about E.P. Thompson before, and I'm trying to think about phraseology, like a working class that thinks it is a working class and acts in that way. And there are relics in the Labour Party perhaps, or in the more bureaucratic trade unions, like the RMT or whatever, of that memory that used to exist. But I think and there are obviously isolated pockets of that sort of thing, but I don't think it comes together in the same way that you can say there is a working class in motion in New Zealand today. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I wasn't alive back then, so I don't know what it felt like. But to me, it definitely feels that most people do not think of themselves in relation to class at all, really. I don't think. So, but yeah.
May I also respond to both of you?
Yeah, I was also thinking I might respond to you, Jackson, and then forgot to. I have similar feelings, but I think possibly it was just a choice of words thing. I think we need to, in the contemporary space that we're in the left, we need to really make it clear what is the working class today. And take it back to, honestly, some of the first principles of communism and the theory, and actually say everybody who is salaried and not in control of the businesses, of capital, is working class. The divide in the inequality that exists in this time is so huge that we should have solidarity between people who do not think of themselves as working class, people who are even on, decent salaries. I don't know, up to 200,000? I think you're still working class. If you don't own 20 homes, then you should be fighting with us against the millionaire, billionaire, arsehole class.
You were going, yeah, sure.
Oh,
I was going to, we'll go to the
Yeah,
Q&A, yeah.
okay.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So we'll start Q&A now, and I'm going to use moderator privilege and ask the first question. So, Quinn, you talked about neoliberalism being a response to the new left being corrupted, whereas Toby, you sort of alluded to there being many strands of the new left, and one of them perhaps sort of devolved into neoliberalism. I'm just wondering, if we define the right as simply opportunistic or conservative, as opposed to the left, which is defined by ideas, and say that the right doesn't really have ideas of its own, to what extent is the right's ideas just simply a legitimate inheritance from the left, not necessarily going to be corrupted or whatever, but just their ideas are descended from our legacy of the new left as much as the new left ideas as well. And I guess also just to expand on that, in New Zealand, we didn't really have a mass movement in 1968 compared to other countries, and arguably many of the signs of the new left reach us a lot later, which happens with a lot of sort of trends on the left. They come from the United States or other countries and come to New Zealand a bit later. And you could say that the 80s was our 1960s, in the sense that you had the 1981, the Springbok tour, which for international audiences was a massive protest movement against South Africa. So, it was an anti-racist, it was in many ways a new left movement. And then in 1984, you had the fourth Labour government, which is the government that implemented neoliberalism. And arguably, the 1984 government was also a legacy of the new left of the 60s. I mean, it's figures David Longyear, Phil Gottfried, all of them got politicised and joined the new left in the 60s. And how much was the new left corrupted, and how much was neoliberalism the corruption of the new left, how much was it just inheriting the ideas of the new left? That's really one, but do you want to respond to it, Toby?
So I wrote an article on counterfeatures. I don't know if anybody's read this, about 1968 revisited, which addresses this very question. But very briefly, I think in this country, the right has always got ideas, and it always is developing ideas. So in the 50s, 60s, and 70s is dominant. This is ruling class ideology. It's pragmatic, conservative, trying to hold the fort against the growing moral tide. So they want to stop the liberalisation of society. So they're trying to hold on to conservative hierarchy. So they're painting it this is modern, right? And this often is associated in the workplace and it's a class with a paternalistic outlook, where you try to be a little bit nice to the workers but control them at the same time. right? So that's the ideology. It switches, and the reason it switches to neoliberalism is simply because of class struggle. And I see neoliberalism as a reaction to class struggle and this big upsurge that happens on the new left, but it fans outwards. After 68, this is the key thing. 1968 was the beginning, not the end. So it fans out to the broader working class, and you have this massive strike waves in the 70s that were the biggest thing ever in terms of class struggle in this country. And this was a real challenge. I've read Employer Archive, so this is what I do for my job. Business Roundtable, New Zealand Employers Federation, were explicitly trying to counteract this big push, which was causing them squeeze profits. And so they turned to neoliberalism, and they get these ideas from overseas. And then so I would see neoliberalism as a reaction to the left, although some people did do what you talked about, who did sort of take the sort of liberal ideas of the 60s and 70s and then take out the economic aspect and just have the so you see that the Labour Party in 1984, you had the alliance between banning nuclear warship visits, getting out of ANZUS, legalising homosexuality, it was called. But then that alliance with liberal element with the right-wing economic element. But these people were on the right, no doubt about it. They weren't on the left, in my opinion. So people like Helen Clark, etc., Phil Goff, etc., were on the right. We'll make that clear. And Mark.
Kia ora, I'd just like to take on what Toby just said, because we saw Phil Goff and Helen Clark on the demos in the early 70s. They were Princess Street Labour Party people. They were not us, they were not the left. I'm not our part of the left. I mean, not radical, not Marxist, not class conscious. They were soft Labour Party left, and the same way I see soft Labour Party left now hasn't changed. It's no different. Even the Princess Street Labour Party branch was the most radical of the Labour Party branches, but we still saw them as soft and not class conscious. So you did right.
Right. So these are the things.
So the people that I honour through the years, and I don't think the ones that haven't gone down the right-wing or neoliberal track, or the people like Graham Clark sitting here in this room, the people from my generation or even earlier, and the people in generations since, who have stayed class conscious and aware, who have stayed and struggled at least in their lives, because sometimes parts of our lives, I got taken out for a few years because I had twins as a silent mother. Like things in our lives can take us out for a while, but that basically through their lives stay committed. And I've seen people come through the Vietnam era, through the anti-Springbok, through the student protests, through unemployed protests, like the people that stay on and on, the ones that people that are on the streets about Palestine now, the people that have talked to the treaty of my generation. There are people that have just kept going, and they don't change their fundamental understanding of whose side they're on. That's why whose side they're on is always in my mind. And you show that by your practice. And of course there's people who leave the struggle for all sorts of reasons. But it's not like people like us sold out or shifted ideology. So I reacted quite badly to your questions, Benji. The second part was that neoliberalism was somehow the legitimate inheritance of the left.
I just mean as opposed to being corrupted, like.
Yeah, I didn't really get that. Or that the right doesn't have ideas or stolen ideas or something, because the right, as I know Bryce Edwards understand, they've had that. I mean, since capitalism came to this country, it's been a war. Right back to when the capitalist system was part of settlement. And the role of the Montpellier Society and other right-wing think tanks internationally that extends into this country. The right now, and always has been, far more powerful in terms of its of the ideas that it's been able to bring in here from overseas, and of course from local traders, local major capitalists, local business. That power is immense, and our problem now, whatever age we are, our problem now is that we are so weak and fractured and not organised and lacking key elements of organisation. That's our problem. We do need ideology. We shouldn't be scared of ideology. We shouldn't be scared of organising. But what we lack are the organisations to do that. That's why we're so weak. We do have lots of ideas. We have lots of wonderful people. But there's far more of us than I think any of us realise actually around the country, but we're not organised to act together.
Shall I go?
I can say something. On the inheritance of the left, or neoliberalism being an inheritance of the left. That is not what you're saying, or it is what you're saying? Or
That's what I'm asking.
oh, okay. I think possibly that overstates the role of, not kind of the opposite of what you're just saying, but not really. The role of ideas in it, whereas I think it's probably more important to see it as a change in capitalism itself, where it's changing form and reacting to working class struggle, and then the ideas come later. So I don't know. I mean, they just believe whatever they need to believe, really. I don't know.
Yeah.
I have quite a few different thoughts that I want to respond to here. Firstly, I think when I first mentioned the idea of liberalism and personal liberties being corrupted into neoliberalism, I was thinking more in the context of the right deliberately taking the idea of freedom and accepting it and making it part of capitalism and promoting it and then using it against us. I think, is that something?
No.
Cool. I mean, I don't think the right has good ideas, but they definitely do have ideas, and they actively, going right back to fascism, Nazi Germany's ideas came from the US. It was born there with what's called the Heritage Foundation, or what became the Heritage Foundation. And we have the same sort of things going on now. We have wonderful David Seymour, who works with the Atlas Network. There are international think tanks which will come up with their own ideas. They will also look at what we do and they will take what they can. I think, given that the very principle of imperialism and colonialism is to take, they will take what we can celebrate and they will try and twist it and use it against us. I'll also briefly draw to what you were saying with regards to Helen Clark, fuck off. Yeah, absolutely, they're not leftists. They were never leftists. Looking internationally, that was also a similar era to Tony Blair, to the Iraq War, and New Zealand, the UK getting involved in US imperialism. These were all, obviously George Bush was not a Democrat, but either way, it was Labour governments in the UK and in New Zealand who were most heavily involved in that. And as you said, Benji, it was a Labour government that began to implement neoliberalism here. This is the right co-opting leftist movements, even if they label themselves as Labour. I don't know if this is a term that's used here, but in the UK we say blue Labour. Conservative Labour people that are not leftist. And in terms of things we're lacking now, I think the biggest element that we really need, that is very obviously something that we don't have because of the current economic system, communal spaces to organise in. And it's absolutely fantastic that we have Trades Hall, and there are a few others, but really what we need is community that allows us to organise.
Great, we'll open to the floor now, so I'll start over here. When we're looking at actually, can you?
I just Should we go test? Yeah. Hi. I don't want to leave the question of 1968 unspoken. I think the panelists have capably pointed to the New Left and many of its aspects. But given the great clamorous character of 1968, the events that occurred in the world, whether we're talking about the Tet Offensive or President Johnson resigning or May 68, any number of examples you can point to. I guess I'll pose this question in two ways, so that anyone can answer the question, not just those who are older or those who are younger. And that is that this crescendo that 1968 represented in world affairs, could we say that this collection of events was an organising moment, or was it disorganising? Was it an explosion from a great height of militancy, and it was a positive lesson for the New Left, or did it lead to a greater kind of fracturing and liquidation? And if so, what are the lessons for the left today? What might the defeats of the New Left, or the 68 moment, how might that be reproducing itself for the left today, and how are people learning, how are people experiencing the world through the prism of the New Left? I don't know who to give it to. Anyway? Sure.
So yeah, 1968 was a defeat. You're right. I mean, they tried revolution and they got crushed. All around the world, governments crushed by force or repression. More often, people from the old left, like the French Communist Party, helped crush that rebellion of workers and students in France. Not just Paris, it was France. But general strike, 10 million people for a whole month. You know, almost workers' councils being formed. Some there was a commune of Nantes. All these, self-government was coming through and it gets crushed. And so one legacy of the New Left I want to mention, it's good you've raised this question, is post-structuralism. Because in France, a lot of people were radicalised by 68, and there was revolution on the cards, and then a few years later, post-structuralism comes out, which to me is like a conservative tendency on the left, as former radicals saying revolution is impossible, class struggle is impossible, and all we can do is basically, sorry, I'm very cynical, hopefully there's no post-structuralists here. If they are, please speak up and tell me I'm completely wrong. But actually, all we can do is just read texts. And it's, discourse analysis, right? And that's all we can do. You give up, and we'll just say, power's evil, be like Foucault, you can't do anything, right? And so that's one legacy of the New Left, and to be honest, that's ultra-peasant, so that's way worse than, in my opinion, the Frankfurt School, which is really fascinating, I think, Frankfurt School, because that was still being redeveloped. But that's a reactionary element, and that dominates universities. That's what I found when I went to university, no longer there, by the way. It dominates, that ideology dominates so-called left-wing academia, and it crushes anything on the genuine left. They actually do repress. And so there's that, how to fight repression. I think it's one legacy of the New Left. Because the forces of the state will crush. They will use so many different elements. They did, I don't want to say anything, but, there is that element of ideological repression by force, repression by politicians, repression by other people on the left. And how do we counter that? And that's, when you need alliances, you need the broad-based community support, you need not to be isolated and go ultra-militant, all those lessons, I think. So that's one element. But also the other element of the New Left, the legacy, is that they did do amazing things. And 68, to some extent, was a springboard era, I think it was called, the redistricting video, where so many other movements like women's liberation, the Maori revival happens at the same time, class struggle, all influenced by the New Left, or reacting against it, being very sexist, male-dominated and white-dominated, and shit, we have to look at racism here and sexism here, and that did lead to the most broadest left-wing movement, in my opinion, ever, in terms of trying to address everything, and in a good way, not as in a sectarian way, sort of the quality of life was the thing they wanted to change, everything. Which I think is one legacy of the New Left, which is good at that. It's not just about economics, it's not just about class, it's about everything. We need to change everything, right? So that's a good aspect, but again, that element was crushed over a longer period. That revival that comes out of 68 you know, slowly gets crushed by the 80s neoliberalism. You know? Yeah, so I think that, hopefully. Answer? Does it the same?
Kia ora, I can't help but also answer that I agree with a lot of what you've just said. But as someone, I think that we can be too binary, or one of our problems sometimes can be that we don't accept ambiguity and complexity. And that was one of the mistakes of, or it still can be, of people on the left, that everything has to be perfect or correct, when actually, and it's one of the things that, now I get into younger people, but I feel with some younger people this urge to purity, and it's so dangerous. When you've been around, you know, like, none of us are perfect, none of us are pure, whoever we are, whatever our background, and accepting both our own humanity and lack of purity, but also our political lack of purity, and that political learning and experience is ambivalent, diverse, and it's actually useful to pull out that there's different responses and contradictions within any event. So going back to 68, I think it's both the things that Toby's talked about, or that the Quinn or Michael asked the question around it was, for me, it was a crescendo and an organising moment from which I've spent my whole life learning. I mean, that time, 67 to 69, a period of revolutionary fervour for me personally and for those I was with and organising with and on the streets with, but it's never left me. People like me just kept learning. We learned from what went wrong. Of course, we saw the defeat. The defeat was there. And the fact that in Aotearoa we didn't get that far, I mean, but in some ways we went further. I mean, also, as we've kept saying, lots of what we came out of it. Different kinds of organising and different movements, and some of them in long term are having quite big victories, like around nuclear free, around as far as it's gone, women's and queer liberation and rejecting apartheid South Africa and so on. Like there were in the end some victories. And it was all built, a lot of that came from that period. So the springboard is useful. I also agree with what you're saying about the crushing effect of postmodernism, post-structuralism, having been briefly in some of the academic world. I was just horrified. I was supposed to be teaching Foucault at one point. I'd never read it before, and I started reading it, and I just, what, is this what happened to a generation? Like, okay, that was the last time. I couldn't be to pass any of it on to the students, that's for sure. But I also just, and so yes, I think in the academic world that stuff's been devastating. But I'll try to ignore it and just carry on outside. But the last thing I wanted to say was one of you were talking about the importance of communal bases, because that's been right from the beginning of PYM resistance. Understanding and knowing the importance of having our own bases, or for the trade unions, these trade schools or union buildings. For us outside, much harder, of course. But my political life has a lot of it has been around trying to create those spaces, what I think of as autonomous spaces that we control. So the Auckland Unemployed Workers' Rights Centre that I was part of setting up and part of for 16 years in the 80s and 90s, we could never have done what we did. We became a broader and broader base for many activities, way beyond unemployment, welfare and poverty. We did all sorts of things and created a lot of groups because we had our own space that wasn't in the hands of anyone else except this rugged group of militant unemployed people and beneficiaries and political activists. And lots of groups came out of it, including the 3 Auckland People Centres, which you had Wellington People Centre for a while too. So that was based on the idea of people joining for a certain amount a month per family, in our case $10 a month, doctors, dentists, hairdressing, green direction, a whole lot of services that were in the control of the people who were members. But we always kept the Unemployed Workers' Rights Centre there. It was like the political and educational one of our people centres. And when the Rights Centre, we dissolved ourselves in 1999 and left the people centres in Auckland to keep going. And Roger Fowler was part of what was running one of our people centres in Maui. The people centres kept going for a while, but they ultimately failed in Auckland. And looking back, I think the main reason they failed is because our political and educational wing, our street organising wing, our ideological wing left. And without that, they would just become a service organisation. And so that's another lesson for me, is the importance of having both those together and not just becoming a colonised NGO.
Yeah.
But now, to have our spaces, now we've lost, in our case, we lost some very important spaces. I'm still part of one called Cotalia Research and Education for Social Change, which was brought out of the unemployed movement and some other groups. That's still going, that's who I work for now. If anyone's interested, we've got a website. Feel free to contact me. And we're still working in this space, but of course we're a very small under-resourced organisation. But yes, totally acknowledging that, and that's one of our biggest problems.
We might go, I've seen that Dee's got her hand up, but I might just quickly, there's a question from the Zoom, which you have to, Ryan, if you want to read it out.
Yeah, there's just, welcome to the people who are online as well, by the way. There's just a question from the Zoom from Anthony for any of the panelists to answer. Anthony says, are uprisings or resistance inevitable? If so, why do we talk about the new left when it seems to just have ended up policing society and a Maoist long march through the institutions into today's conservative individuality and offshoring as Quinn posed?
Who wants to? Do you want to take that quickly?
I'm not sure that uprisings are inevitable. I think the idea of inevitability would, I guess, preclude the requirement of action from us. You know, if I say such and such is inevitable, then I'm going to be complacent about it. It's not something that I'm going to strive for. No, we have to strive for uprisings. We have to fight for them. And yeah, that's what I got.
I think uprisings are inevitable in the sense that, like, this may be a bit online brained, but like the sense that like the IRA proposed to Margaret Thatcher that like you only have to win, you have to win every time, but you only have to win once. In that, like, capitalism is a system that creates its own greater diggers, so inevitably something else will come out of it. But whether those uprisings produce anything is another question. It's a question of organisation. That there have been crises in the past couple of years in Aotearoa, like COVID, that produced the Parliament occupation, all of these sorts of things. But there is no strong left or like organisation that can like act as a catalyst in there, and so very little is produced by it. I don't really understand the second part of the question about the march to the institutions.
I'll just read out again. If so, why do we talk about the new left when it seems to just have ended up policing society in a Maoist, quote, long march through the institutions, end quote, into today's conservative individuality?
Yeah, I don't know if I accept the premise of that, and people are very annoying, but like, is that necessarily a result of, like people are moralistic, but like people are always, I don't know, but, I don't know if I have anything to say about that really, more just the revolutionary bit.
I guess I'm trying not to respond because I don't really get where the person is coming from or what they're saying about the Maoist long march through the institutions. Just doesn't really make sense. But
it's a quote from Rudi Dutschke, who led the youth wing of the, who led the Germany, leader of the Germany left.
Well, the strategy.
History on it because
go Graham.
the long march through the institutions was actually something that was raised in 1968. And rather than seizing political power from revolution, the idea was that activists would combine and would stage a long march through the institutions of the state and gradually take over.
Thanks, Grant.
Didn't work.
Yeah, and you mentioned post-structuralism and ideology, like the students of Althusser and Jacques found to be part of an inheritance from that. for instance. Like, a lot of them were Maoists and participated in May '68.
I would just say, that I think we have to accept that all avenues of attack, for want of a better phrase, against the status quo are valid to some extent. And I guess this maybe also circles to the idea of reformism versus revolution. Making a really slow, incremental impact. I think potentially useful, can get some results, but it needs to be combined with revolutionary action in other spaces and with all other avenues that we can use in the left.
You've got to remember that at the time this was being raised, there was the Cultural Revolution in China. And that was seen as the long march continuing to transform Chinese society. That's where the idea of a long march through the institutions came from. That's why it was called Maoist.
Did you have any thoughts on that, Sue, being an ex-Maoist?
Thanks for refreshing my memory or teaching me things, folks, and I'm glad for the intervention, Graham. I do remember that. And in fact, some of us have always, think of other comrades too, have lived by this philosophy in a way that there are three ways of making change, three key ways. One's throwing rocks from the outside, attacking from the system from the outside and trying to change it that way. The second way is through the long march through the institutions. So some people take that path, and I tried that for 10 years as a Green Party MP. I really seriously wanted to give it a crack, and that failed, but I gave it a crack. Went through the looking glass. But the third way is by building our own people's or autonomous or workers' organisations or unemployed workers' organisations or women's organisations inside the shell of the rock, inside the rotten system. It is very hard to think and act outside capitalism when you're inside capitalism, but that practice of trying to build, and unions of course are the primary example of this, of building our own organisations is absolutely critical. And that actually we should understand that at different times in our lives and in different ways we can be in those different places, and that having some connection between, we could all be Maoists in those different places or all be whatever we think of ourselves as, legitimately, and be fighting for a transformational or revolutionary change from those different places. But having respect and understanding for each other and being able to have these kind of debates with each other is what's important, rather than just putting each other down.
I did promise that Dea would hear from here, so
I don't think I need it.
we just need to hang up on the online as well.
But we do need for the online people, if that's all right. Sorry to pressure you into it, but we really do have to.
Okay, I want to talk about France in '68.
Just press the button.
There was a revolution. And the French working class was an incredibly militant and strong working class. And that was their uprising. And that uprising, the fight of the French workers, was sabotaged by Russia, by the Stalinists, because they did not want to be isolated in the world. And there was no revolutionary party of the type of Lenin and Trotsky that could argue with the workers that what they should be doing was in fact setting up workers' councils and taking over the running of the society. And I am one of those people that was around in '68, and I remember it very well. And I think what's taken its place in New Zealand is very much the Labour Party. The Labour Party is not anti-work, not anti-capitalism. No. It wants to run society through it. It's totally and absolutely apathetic about the situation of workers, of the poor, of people of different races, etc., etc. It needs to be biffed out, pushed aside.
Here, here.
And that means we, instead of being told by our union sometimes, vote Labour, we should turn our backs and say, no, and we don't vote Green, because Greens are a capitalist party. I think it's really important to see what's actually happening in our society, how apathetic a lot of the unions actually are. You think about the pay equality. The government we've currently got dumped it. What did people in New Zealand, what did unions do? Did they turn around and say, okay, you dumped it, we're down tolls. That's it, until you reinstate pay equity, we are not working. And that would have been not in the favour of the Labour Party at all. They're quite happy. They're going to pay it, they say. Oh, we'll see. They haven't done it for anything else. They were so conservative over the abortion issue. We got a Labour MP who said they would put our Wernat's abortion bill. And, oh no, there's an election. If we have an abortion bill, we want it in.
What was the question?
I'm talking about France and things, and I'm talking about the role of the Zionists, and that role is played by the Labour Party today. So I suggest that you actually, I am a student of Owen soon, and I'm really proud of it. But I think we do need to have revolutionary organisations who actually do analyse events that have happened around the world and can do it critically and honestly and talk about it, rather than pushing people into petty bourgeois, safe politics through the Labour Party, which is a complete dead end. That's it.
Does anybody want to respond to that?
I just want to apologise for my sectarian remark earlier. I didn't come here to be inciting left sectarianism, and I also agree with you about the Labour Party.
Also, yeah, fuck the Labour Party.
Cool. Jump into discussion.
Oh, how we? Is this it? Is this it? Is this it? Oh, fuck, I don't know. Nami Nui Tenenji to Platypus. I'm very happy to be here. Several statements and then a question. To Toby on post-structuralism. Metamodernism, I'm curious to eventually have that conversation with you. That's not the question. To Quinn, Cup High for mentioning patriarchy, a fundamental domination structure to be constantly considering, not the question. To our leftist commentator, our elders, do not underestimate, press the button, oh, no, wait, Joan. Do not underestimate the power of your presence. We want to see you, we want to learn what to do, what not to do. Except if you do it here, you're crushing it, you're down here. Amazing. Question, to Sue and Quinn primarily. The role of revolutionary imagination. It feels like today we are lacking an image or images of the world we want to fight for. You had a very arousing or provocative word you used to describe the past, and it was vibrancy. The question, what informed the vibrancy? What forces were present that enabled it?
Well, this could take us off in a whole lot of new directions. I was at a workshop in Plymouth a few weeks ago called Infrastructures for Collective Imagining or Imagination, which was bringing together like the left activist perspective and artists, left artists. And it was it was really, it was led by the Dressing Gallery on the back of an exhibition of Vietnamese artists, rebel artists from their country, and it really, once again, demonstrated to me how important the links between people who are working for political revolutionary political change in whatever sphere we're all the different places we are, in working with artists, what we used to call cultural workers, the dramatists, the singers, the songwriters, the artists, the playwrights. For me, cultural work is always, the more we can integrate it and use art in all its different forms, that helps art, writing, books, all the arts help us expand our imagination. Science fiction, or that's good science fiction, speaking like we all have our own tastes, but good science and speaking of fiction is one of the places I get inspired by, because that's where people are experimenting and trying to stretch our minds past capitalism and colonialism. But we can do that through art and through all sorts of forms. So it opens up a whole new sphere, but it's one that's always been really important in our work in Kotahi, where I work, and was also important in the unemployed groups I was part of, to bring that element in, because without it we are much less. Our solidarity, our ability to survive is a lot less. It's the ability to build groups and actually think beyond the mundane and to try and to create new worlds. Because without providing that hope and inspiration, others won't join us.
Thank you, Sue. That, everything you just said, totally agree. Such a good question. I could talk about this for hours. I passionately believe that one of the elements we really, really need to push and promote within all of our activist circles is art. There is a reason that the right globally always defunds the arts. It's because that's where imagination and hope and everything that we need comes from. I'm also hugely inspired by fiction. And one of the things that I want to start doing with my mahi is drawing on that directly, because as we know, it's really, really hard to persuade people with facts, with statistics. As useful as they are to back up any argument, we have to tell stories. The right are really good at telling a shitty story that inspires fear. We need to tell stories that inspire hope and that do imagine what a world could be. One of the works of fiction that I've recently been consuming is the Murderbot series, which is science fiction about essentially slavery and utopia, a little tiny corner of utopia in amongst the worst possible capitalist hellscape. I guess just what this current situation would become if totally left unchecked. And I'm a huge lover of Terry Pratchett, and everything that he writes is political. I think we should be teaching it in schools. If everybody read Pratchett, I think the left would be stronger.
It's okay that we're...
That's what I got.
Could I add something?
So there was a phrase in the 60s in the New Left called there was a fun revolution went to it. So there was these sort of action groups that just wanted to combine the revolution and protest with having fun. So the worst version of that was the hippies, and you had Tim Shepard, Prince Brutus, many little groups, and people into some extent were about having fun in the present, so not making militancy a chore, that it's a self-sacrifice. That's really key to it. They weren't about sacrificing their entire lives to a cause. They wanted to have fun with others. And so an example of this, where it seems quite mundane, was in 1969 in Auckland. You probably remember this, the liberation of Albert Park. So Albert Park was the park beside the university, right? And it was a non-free speech area. You weren't allowed to gather there or have political rallies. And so people just gathered there anyway. Thousands of people do that. 10,000 of people that have a thing called Jumping Sundays, right? And lots of it was just about having fun, right? So this seems pretty just countercultural, so what? But 10,000 people turn up, define the law, the bylaw, and they liberate Albert Park, and they basically collectivise sort of private property owned by the Auckland City Council, overturning their law through collective litigation, and becomes a free speech area after that collectivation. But at the same time, they're having fun. So what drew people in to revolt back then was not just the cause, fighting apartheid, fighting racism, fighting class exploitation, sexism, but it was to have fun together, to liberate ourselves. Everybody. Right? So I think that's one key thing I learned. One of the New Left slogans was poetry should be made by all. And there's a famous group called the Situationist International, which I think, everybody heard the SIOIS from France? I think they were sort of combining the cultural revolution with the economic one, right? The economic, social, cultural, personal, collective, everything together to overturn everything, right? So that was their kind of theory where they were coming from.
I think the last question you tried to get to this, but I'll try to be a little more direct with it. Has the left advanced from the new left? Has it gone beyond it or maybe fallen behind it? That's my question.
I could say something. Again, I don't mean to hog. As somebody who's been on the left since the late the 1990s, I think the left has much harder times. Way harder. So when I was in the 1990s, you could go on the dole and live on it. Rents were pretty low. But we lived on the dole and we did activism on the dole. Even though times were pretty tough, we could sort of scrounge out a living and people had some free time. You had a bit of free time, right? Jobs were scarce, but you could kind of get by. But now it's really, really hard. The cost of living is really crunched. It's so much harder to live. People have, often working several jobs if you're a student. You took a full-time student, and then afterwards, when I was a student, you only had to work during the school holidays. The university holidays, right? To get through. You didn't have to work all the, part-time job, right? So I think it's way harder. So the left, I think, has regressed, in my experience. It's less vibrant, there's less theory, there's less action. It has been revived in the last, 10 years, starting to come back a bit. New shoots coming back. So that's kind of exciting. And there's a reappraisal happening and people will learn from the past. But I think that's really important. But overall, I think the left has really declined because my experience is that 70s left was on the move. That was setting the agenda, and political parties were following it. Like the Labour Party was reacting to what the left was doing by pulling troops out of Vietnam, stuff like that. And they were winning. There was little wins all the time. It wasn't revolution, but little reforms wins. And then that goes, right? And I think we have been there has been some ups and downs, of course, but on the whole, my experience is the left has not reached where the new left was at, from what I learned from new leftists, ever since my lifetime, from what I've seen. And I haven't seen everything, so that's just my experience. So that's pretty pessimistic. Sorry.
Thanks. Okay. I guess I agree pretty much. I just think what left. In New Zealand particularly, there are some sects and there are some that are growing, and that's probably better. But I don't know. I've only been around for those past 5 years, so maybe what was before that. That sounds really, really depressing. But yeah, I don't have any life experience. I can't speak to it really. But yeah, it is miserable. There's left is terrible. No, it's not terrible. But there is no left. And maybe it's growing now again. That's good. But
I agree with both of you. I'm gonna put a hopeful spin on it though. I think that the last couple of years, with Trump, with Gaza, And I guess several of the, we could look back to Black Lives Matter, we could probably look even a little further back, but there is so much demand for a resurgence in the left. I think 2026 is our year. I think that we can have this be where we are, perhaps at the bottom of a trough, but we're going to grow.
Kia ora, thanks for saying that, Quinn. It's really important that we don't get depressed like that. And looking backwards, learning from what's happened, but not be depressed by the fact that it's different now than it was then, or that we don't have X groups and Y groups now that we have. Very easy for people like us that have seen it lived through it differently. There's no use looking back like that. There is to learn from it, but the importance is to learn from what we achieved in the past and the mistakes we made in the past, what went wrong from our point of view, what can we change, what can we do now, which is why the work I do is so much around collective and collaborative analysis. We do look at history, we do look at the current situation, but what does that tell us about what needs to be done now with people from all our generations, but above all from the younger generations? What will it take, what does it take to organise more strongly to rebuild or build a left, I nearly used to be a new left, but it's always new. Like, it's not, to me, I never used that term new left really, apart from in a very theoretical way, because what new left? To me, it's just one long struggle that people in generations in the unemployment, we always look back to our comrades of the 1930s. We actually had people from the 1930s when we started that rollout group. No one like our kaumātua. So we always, learn from the ones that were older than us, and they helped inspire us, and they in tune were inspired by the fact we were on the streets again, on the same kaupapa. And so it's not, we all live in our own times and we can learn from the past. Okay, things are, as Toby and the others have said, very different now. And I just add not only that economic reality now, but I've also noticed over the years, like we used to get arrested and be quite militant all the time. But people aren't like that now, and I've realised it's because people are so much more in fear of the impact of not being able to get a job in the public service, or not being able to go and get a university scholarship to Canada or something like that. And so people, in their lives, they're threatened by arrest a lot more than we were. I just blew my chances when I was 16 and carried on. But for people, others, it's not so simple now. The other thing, of course, is the role of the internet, of the web, of social media, and that, of course, still drives me mad. It's so useful as a tool in so many ways, such a wonderful tool, but also keeps driving people down that petition online world, when the only way we'll ever build is face-to-face. Can we get it and we get on the streets and in our meeting rooms and in our art spaces? That's the only way we're ever going to build, one by one, together. And in unions also, it's the only way. And so there are differences and learnings, but we must look with optimism and hope. Otherwise, why bother? We may as well give up.
Can I just add one thing about, I was thinking about protests. I think there have been many spikes, since around early 2000s was a Labour protest about free trade, and then there was another one 2016 about the TPPA, a big protest. But I think there's this trend towards having these massive protests that come out of nowhere. 30,000 people in the streets with climate change, climate strike, thousands and thousands of people, and then it goes nowhere. Whilst what I lived in New Left is they built a movement that went on and on and on, like say even the anti-apartheid movement, formed in the 1916 No Tour movement, I think it was called, 1916, and then goes all the way to 1981, right? And then so it went on and on and on, heaps of education, heaps of building, whilst you don't just have one-off little protests, there's ongoing building of a movement, ideologically, culturally, organisationally, I think that's kind of missing. So I see people now come together really quickly and have massive protests, but what effect does that have on what's going to last and how effective it is? Even with unions, unions have the big mega strike, but has that stopped the government austerity agenda? Has it stopped understaffing, health sector, and with teachers, etc., etc.? So I think we're kind of in a funny age where you can come together really quickly, but things can fall apart really quickly because of maybe social media, I don't know. Yeah.
I just want to add on to what you were saying, Sue, with regards to arrests. You know, I think the consequences now are larger relative to living conditions. A comrade was telling me about their experiences being involved in actions 20 years ago, and several of them being arrested and going through all of the legal proceedings, and it was several years of turmoil for several activists. And even then, it was really, really rough. It disrupted many people's lives, and there was a huge outpouring of support from the activism community. But I think even now, just a couple of decades on, that would be so much harder, because the resources, the capital, the money required to support several activists through many years of legal proceedings are that much higher now relative to everybody's cost of living and wages. I think, circling back to your question about whether whether we've failed to meet where the New Left was at. I think we haven't, insofar as we are still a great community. There's a huge activism community in Wellington in particular. I think that it's just relative to the current conditions that we have, relative to the structures that are currently in place.
I'm just wondering if there's anyone round the back that has a question, because I can't see them. Okay.
Hi, thank you, all panelists. I appreciate what Sue just said about the sort of throwing a bit of doubt on this label of the New Left and how much it is actually that different from what we have now. Because I wonder that if there's a bit of a rose-coloured glasses or grass is always green view of the New Left in what you were saying, Jackson, about the workers' movement is dead now, but it was so much better than back then. Because when talking about periodization in this really abstract way, it's really easy to overstate similarity and difference. But I think that we're skewing towards the latter. I studied one aspect of the New Left in New Zealand academically, which was the Māori liberationist side. I was also recruited to my current politics by people who were politicised around the same time as Sue. And what I read about or am told about is the left that is not really that alien to us. Most of the stuff that worked back then works now. Most of the stuff that failed back then causes us to fail now. As Sue said, there are many lessons, maybe not lessons of the New Left as a whole, but lessons from individuals and groups back in history. And because of those similarities, even if some things have changed. I think you're getting something true by saying that the workers' movement is dead, which is that workers are significantly weaker, and as Toby says, the left has regressed in various ways, and the working class doesn't intervene in politics as a class. I don't necessarily think that it did so much more during the New Left period in New Zealand. There was the 1979 mass strike. I think it's overstating things a bit to call it a general strike. It didn't last very long. But we had some reasonably significant strikes today, and though the movement side of things was so much stronger in the sort of 81 to 84 period, it was, I think as Toby said earlier, pretty middle class. Significantly about personal moral stances or oriented around tailing various overseas or local nationalist movements or states, often in very supportable struggles, but it's a kind of left very similar in so many respects to what we have now, just at a smaller scale today. And its failings were very similar to the failings of the left today. It was incredibly easy, for example, for Labour to co-opt the movementist side of the New Left into the neoliberal program. But there were some really admirable campaigns of that period. I don't think that they were incomparably larger or more interesting than those we have today. And like the best, for the most part, they involve putting aside sectarian differences to have unity in practice, while still allowing the flourishing of different ideas in dialogue with each other. There was a flourishing of different streams of Maori nationalist thinking, of different streams of the women's liberation movement, and some seriously quite high-level Marxist debate. The Red Papers journal, Owen Gage's Towards the Socialist Polynesians is, for all its flaws, a pretty interesting piece that really speaks to the high level of the different ideas that are going around at the time. I bring up these better parts to dispute something that was said right at the start, which was that there is a contradiction between debating ideas and unity. Yes, if you aim for political unity without really convincing each other of a common program, it can stifle debate. But you can have unity in action while still having open debate. There's no contradiction there. I would point to some of the campaigns that I've had with 3 of the panelists here. Students Against Cuts, QED, the Left TEU Network, or the United Front demo that we just had about Cuba, where it just came from now. That approach is really a tool of the old left, if you like. The United Front tactic was formalised by the Third International in, I want to say, 1921. But I think it is one answer to a lot of the problems raised today about the more troublesome aspects of the left, the new left, the base left, the sectarianism, the liberal moralism that throws up barriers between people working together, and so on. You unite on what you agree on, and you talk openly about what you don't. And I'm curious what the panelists think of that approach of collaboration without quashing differences. Yeah, that's all. Maybe to break that into 2 parts. It's the first about the decline of the right parts, and then there's the tactical unity. I think, you probably are right. That's the framing of the whole panel, right? Is that there was unity, so that sort of was framing my thinking, I suppose. I do think, although there has been a return to strike, the level of strikes in the last couple of years. I think what was happening in the 70s was categorically very different, and Toby would probably be much better at speaking to that because he's writing a book about it. But that's the class that will produce communism. It's not us sitting in rooms or whatever. It's people actually in the thing. So I think that is actually the main important thing. And the fact that that has declined is actually really bad. But maybe the strikes are coming up, so that is also very important. And I think I said the thing about there are green shoots, so I don't know. We should try and pull on those. And I agree pretty much about the tactical unity. Pretty much. I don't think that people should try to put themselves in organisations that can't agree to a long-term strategy because it's just not going to work. But that doesn't mean you have to kill each other. So, yeah. Anyone else want to respond to that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I don't know if I came across as a little too down on current splits in various circles. I definitely intended to make it clear that what you're talking about here, this unity, is something that we already are doing. We just need to prioritize it. I think part of the reason that I said to potentially set aside discussion in favour of action is I have a lot of comrades who have very little time to give, and sometimes get really frustrated with long organising meetings. They want to be able to come along and make plans to do the action in under an hour, and I know that's challenging.
Oh, I really want that too.
I know, but I guess, if 10% of the room leaves after an hour, that's maybe acceptable, but if we're looking at nearly half the group needing to come out after an hour, then we're spending too much time debating. I really want more debate. I love it. I think a lot of us probably love it more than we think we do as well, but possibly not in organising meetings, right? We need to be able to say, this is the space for planning the thing we're going to do. What is the common ground? Let's find the common ground as quickly as possible so that we can get on with the action. we'd still love to debate at a separate time. And I think that there's a grey area between those two positions that is probably well end up needing to actually settle. I guess my ideal as someone who organises in too many spaces is that we have as little intellectual debate in an organising meeting as possible.
It was a really good critique, thank you, well thought out, and really pertinent. I think, just to return to the past, I won't speak about the present, I spoke very eloquently about the present, but just to return to the past, I think we can romanticise the past, past struggles or past theorists even, and say they were much greater than they were. But they were limited. All theories and movements, including the Union movement, have been limited. And you can look at them, I mean, and they did fail, to be honest. And that was true of the New Left, and I don't mean to romanticise it. I did read a whole lot of stuff that I think the current consensus I've read from and listened to podcasts on the left today is that the New Left was very limited and very backward. But I actually, so I was making these back by saying, trying to stress them because of this other stuff. But one critique I had was what you just said, that left nationalism. In this country, left nationalism was, I think, dominant on the radical left. So you've got groups like Citizen today coming out directly out of the Christchurch BYM who campaign against foreign control of Aotearoa, right? So you look at capitalism from the point of view of foreign control of foreign corporations having their roots around the world, and that of course, basically means the critique was that they're trying to form an alliance with parts of the capitalist class against foreign capital, right? How does that help the working class? So that debate happened in the 70s and 80s. So that's one example. Another one would be, I think the key thing that I've learned on the left is that our key finding is that we're marginalised from the working class as a whole. And so one thing I want to address is Bruce Schressen's critique, because his critique was that the left in this country is completely marginalised from a largely conservative working class that hates radicalism, hates radical people, sees them as a problem, as a keep away from me, you're a nutter. But I don't think, I've sort of spent my life in a dialogue with Bruce Schressen, and I think he's wrong, because I think, the experience in the 70s and 80s with so many, and also the New Left wasn't just students or middle class, it was, in this country, it was PYM resistance push-ups. Majority working class, believe it or not, in this country and around the world. Often the people who were students who went into the New Left, by the way, were from working class backgrounds. So what happened was that these people connected with workers because they were from that background and they could connect with them, went on the factory floor, learnt what was happening, formed friendships, and then caused trouble and overturned many unions, transformed them. So it is possible. So I don't think the leftists that Jason critique that the left is always alienated from the working class is true. I think that's the New Left proves in that turned industry that it can form, in an unemployed workers movement, can form lasting, real connections with working class people in a genuine way. And not a sort of vanguard, we know the truth. Yeah. You go in there and you learn from workers rather than the other way around. I think it's, and then you form lasting connections, and then those solidarities. Or workplace farmers, it's a great example of the meat industry or car industry, is the basis of struggle, often. That makes sense.
Kia ora, I'll just take a look at what Toby just said, because so many in my generation in different ways went on to work in factories and plants and in some of our cases in the unemployed workers movement. And in those places, you cannot be effective in any way, personal, political, or anything else, unless you're with the people, right, and you can speak the language and listen, learn and be in a respectful relationship, whether it's on a shop floor or outside inside working. And so what I saw later, like in the early 2010s, in the Auckland Action Against Poverty group that I was in Auckland, we kind of started to rebuild the old movement in Auckland later. And in the early years of that, it was all these wonderful young people, mainly students, came in, but they had this way of talking like they were very elite, like they used really theoretical language both out of the sociology department, type place, and
I know exactly who you're talking
and
about.
there's more than one of them, and out of Marxist theory. And how can you be in an anti-poverty or unemployed group? How could you be in a union if you talk like that? Like, no idea. And so that generation, this is older than you lot now, but that generation, some of them that have stayed on in various unions and things, they need to learn that. And we all need to learn it. Otherwise, there's no point. Whatever our individual class background. I'm actually going to have to go in a minute. So I'd just like to say this has been really great. I'm sorry I don't have time to get to know people here because I can see, I feel there's many interesting people in the room, but I hope we have a chance to connect again in a way in the future. Possibly even my dream is we have organisations that we connect inside and continue both the thinking and the doing. Sure.
Sorry, do you mind if I got a quick one? Just because I was kind of struck by something that you said, Sue. I'll keep the question very quick for you. You described the way that people who live in New Zealand would generally safer in regards to their activism, in terms of being you're less likely to get shot or whatever. And I just wanted to ask the table more generally, but I guess we'll start with Sue if you have to go. To what extent does this sort of safety reflect the stakes of activism in New Zealand? And so, like, what is the horizon of possibilities for a left in New Zealand, both historically in the 60s and also now? And finally, if we are sort of impelled to act, as you know, globally, as the 60s would appear to, the 68 specifically would appear to be, is this a moral imposition, like Jason may critique? Is this our moral duty, or is there a horizon for this action? Materially, we show solidarity for.
No.
Sorry.
I can't answer that now. This is huge.
Sorry.
But that horizon that we can do is up to each of us. The more we come up together, not to be limited, to try not to limit ourselves, even though I and others have talked about the barriers we face in this age, and of course we faced in the past. There's all kinds of barriers and challenges, but our task is to think together about how to go further, which is why going to the arts helps as well, but to actually not limit the horizon and to think together, to analyse together.
More specifically, the horizon for New Zealand. What is the horizon of possibility for a left in New Zealand?
Yeah, this is the question of our times, and one I continue to grapple with massively because I see the lack of, if you want me to get particular, I see the massive lack of organisation of either effective communistic or anarchistic or socialistic party or parties in any big way, and the lack of any parliamentary party on the what I would call the socialist anarchistic left. And I increasingly wonder if there's a possibility for a democratic socialist party in this country that would be able to hold within it, as Die Linke in Germany does, and other democratic socialist parties internationally, to be able to hold within it corpuses and factions that come out of all these different places that we come from, including older, different places that are able to be held within one organisation, but that does collectively act in the interests of weak class and their families and of the natural world and of tino rana tiratana. And yeah, that we can cross that. Like, I still dream of that. I'm still playing with it. But younger generations need to be there. I don't have time to talk more. That's one horizon I continue to look at.
Thank you.
So, what can I add? On internationalism, I think that's key. Absolutely key. I think it's some speaks today we're in an easier situation. Because when I was growing up, to learn anything apart from your comrades, you'd have to buy magazines, and they cost a lot of money coming from overseas. So everything was in print because nothing was for free. So it's a lot easier to get information these days. So much easier, to get a free book, for example, and to listen to something from the other side of the world on YouTube or whatever. When previously you could not see those debates. Recently I looked at the debate. A famous debate, E.B. Thompson, this is new stuff, against the structuralists within the New Left. There's this massive fight, and you can see on YouTube actual debate, E.P. Thompson debating these other New Leftists. There's a great debate. It's about subjectivism versus structuralism, key thing underneath, and that type of thing wasn't available when I was younger. So there's much more. So that's one possibility today that is great, but I think today it's so much harder to bring people together in a long-term way. Maybe this was a social media atomization, but it's supposed to bring us together, but it's actually keep us apart into our little silos, looking on the screen, rather than there's far less face-to-face contact, I find. And workplaces being stratified. That's a key. That's actually the decision of the capitalist class. They are trying to atomise us. So how to bring us together, I think, is the key thing. And in terms of the horizon on the left here, I come from a largely Marxist tradition that things always reform. So like the key author that's influenced me in that regard would be Beverly Silver. She wrote a book called Forces of Labour. She's a world system theorist, but she's also a Marxist. And she's basically saying that every time there's a reaction capital, which is what's happened since the 80s, they co-opt, right? They take over what was previously, and then they restructure it and what they want, and then they decompose, break up. So purposely are so that. And then now that we're going through another restructuring process as they are, we're in another period of restructuring coming out of the post-COVID long recession we're in now. And with every restructuring comes possibilities that new forms of people come together, or they have to, or they realise their power, like nurses at the moment, or logistics workers, or, there's always reformation that there's more power, that people realise that. And I think, so, there's many protests around the world today, it's still happening. I think there's still possibilities, but it's harder. That makes sense. But I think there's always a process of ongoing stuff happening, if that makes sense. But there's always, but the powers that try and stop it are much stronger. That makes sense. But I recommend Forces of Labour. It's a great wee book.
Sue, it's half past.
Yeah, I might just
Race off.
really sorry to go. I've got a long journey ahead of me.
Thank you, Sue.
Oh, Kenji's got one.
Did either of you want to respond?
Yes.
Either of us,
God, there's so much to respond to there. Firstly, when we're talking about horizons, I don't know if this is specific terminology or I'm interpreting that to mean like the limits of what we could imagine and strive for.
What the?
Yeah, cool. Yeah. Just so I know what we're talking about here. I personally try and throw myself into everything that I do with the confidence of a cis white man and assume that everything is possible, and therefore there are no limits. More realistically, I think the limits are set by our capacity, and breaking some of the capitalist structures and making more people available, making more of each individual's time available will increase what we can aspire to achieve. Again, I circling back to what I mentioned about comrades who have very little time to give, if we were able to even make small incremental improvements to quality of life, cost of living, all of these issues, it would free up even, an extra hour per person per week. That would massively increase what we're able to achieve. So I guess the sky is the limit if we can make some small changes to better our communities. I think I'm going to slightly push back on your focus on Aotearoa. I know, I guess, I'm assuming you're asking because you want to know what we can achieve here, right now. I think everything we achieve has to be global. We have to work with our comrades in other countries, be inspired by our comrades in other countries. They can inspire us to go further and harder. Looking at in the UK, in case you can't tell, I follow a lot of UK politics. So the Palestine Action issue in the UK, the protesters who were willing to go to prison for extended periods of time and trust that their community had their back, that's fucking inspiring. There were, up until Christmas Eve, there were several prisoners, my kind of age, Jackson's age, who were putting their life on the line, who were on hunger strike and came very, very close to death. Some of them exceeded the length of hunger strike of previous hunger strikers who had died. And I think connecting with and directly working with and engaging with our international comrades can also again help to expand what is possible here.
So the question is what is possible in a New Zealand context, or what is the horizon?
For a New Zealand left, yes.
Well, I think it should be pretty obvious that New Zealand is not going to be the place where a world proletarian revolution breaks out, and if it did, that would be a very bad thing because of how marginal it is. But I think that we can attempt to play a minor role or help people in other countries where that might happen. I think what people need to do in the present context is to think about how they can work towards something for the long term and actually get stuck in a way that they're not gonna Toby was talking about protest movements that just spike and then they go nowhere. But people need to be plugged into the ground and trying to achieve something over the long term. And I think the best way to do that is through workplace organizing in our current context. But there are probably other ways as well. And the horizon is probably just to make things a little bit better in the short term, because I think most people can probably accept that we're quite far away in this country from a revolutionary situation.
Do you want to ask some of this?
We just have a question from the online audience. Again, this one's from Connor Dwight, all the way in Australia. Connor says, what lessons do you think the left took from 1968? And was this a help or a hindrance to emancipatory politics? Okay, always forget how to say that word.
And the answer is, you need a revolutionary party.
I think I've said too much, but I've written quite a bit about it. I've written an article or two about this. I think there's so many different lessons you can learn from big uprisings. It might be the absence of a party, it might be the absence of genuine, ongoing, radical struggle that really connects with people and in facing repression, how to stop it, how to stop that cohabitation. There's so many lessons. I think I've spoken enough, but yeah.
I'm not sure I have much to add on that question. I'm not sure what specific lessons we have learned. I guess from the research I did before coming here, because I did not experience 1968 or anything that followed that in the context of what would be described as the New Left. I guess I only really came up with criticisms and an acceptance that a lot of the work was good. I didn't actually really think what specific thing is excellent to draw on. I think, so if I can actually not answer the question, but rather give a lesson that we need to learn, not something we have learned, I think it is to really truly embrace intersectionality and anti-colonialism and break down those massive structures of oppression that hold back every single movement that is aligned with the work we do.
I think I gave like a summary of what I thought people would, should learn from it just before, but yeah, I don't know, people need to form and join political organizations, whatever you think that looks like, yeah, and give it a go, because mostly it's out of your control, but you should give it a go, I guess.
May I have one more comment? Centre marginalised voices. I know we joked about me criticising Lloyd Benji. I'll criticise this panel for not having a person of colour on here. I know that's just, you've got the people that were available, right? Centre marginalised voices, centre women's voices in every space. I love the fact that in a lot of the organising spaces I walk into, I'm frequently the token cis man in the room. It's great, Let me listen and learn. Learn my token privilege.
I'm just wondering, Graham, did you have any response to that question, or any other questions?
We're all somewhere.
Well, 68. A help to our hindrance, just as someone else that lived through 68. And did you want to, did you want to make any contribution, actually, a question to the panelists?
I think we're entering into a very intense period of history. Neoliberalism has run its course, and the longer it goes on, the less it can actually deliver. So if you look in New Zealand, there was no homelessness in the 1980s when neoliberalism started. There's homelessness now. You look at poverty, there was less in the 1980s when neoliberalism started, but it's getting worse today. And all of the things that the government is doing are driving that. And it's the same around the world. And so we're reaching a phase of history where rapid change is possible. The same occurred in the 1930s. In New Zealand, we embraced social democracy. In Germany, they embraced Nazism. And we have the same choice today. We have Trumpism or Putinism, or can we have something different, socialism? And to my way of thinking, as a believer in dialectical and historical materialism, there is no end. There is only constant change, and we need to identify what is the main strategic task at this time in New Zealand, and it is ending neoliberalism. And we need to have all the different groups come and promote that in a practical way. So, in the trade union movement, activists should be demanding that their union endorse socialism. In the trade union movement, we should be saying there are now going to be political strikes. No, we're no longer going to have a paid authorised stop work meeting at lunchtime over a political matter. There are going to be political strikes. When the cost of living goes up and we're in a 3-year employment agreement, no longer do we tolerate it and suffer and vote for the next lot that can promise us something. We do what we did in the 70s and say there are exceptional circumstances and we go on strike and demand more. Mm-hmm. There are many ways of striking. You don't have to go out the gate to strike. The most effective strikes that I have organised occurred on the job in a way that hurt the employer 10 times more than it hurt us. if people understand where they're working and can work with others, we can develop a strategy to promote a movement, because we have a choice in this country. Winston Peters is setting himself up, if he lasts long enough, as New Zealand's Trump. And we need to combat that and to promote a socialist alternative.
I might open it to closing remarks from the panelists now, just to give you enough time, but before I do that, does anyone have one last question?
Unless there's someone who hasn't asked one already. It's a quick one. The conversation is sort of circled around the comparison and points of difference and similarity. But simply put, regardless of the specific circumstances or similarity between now and 1968, why does it haunt us? Why is it that we still find ourselves reaching for it?
Me personally, it doesn't haunt me. I reach for history constantly. I think that is an active choice. I think that we shouldn't be reaching for the events of 1968 out of necessity, but out of proactively trying to understand the past movements and how they led here. Echoing back to what Sue said, I think, not liking the term the New Left to distinctly describe what we are describing as the New Left, because it is, to a certain extent, it's an academic, analytical term. We, for the purposes of writing books and articles, we have to label things, but it is one movement that goes in phases, and we can arbitrarily decide that is something to focus on. We have to look at all of it, and if we aren't actively, constantly looking at the history of the movement that we're part of, then what are we doing?
Right. Perfect.
Okay. Well, I guess I was going to ask another sort of question as to prompt your closing remarks, so we can turn it into one, but it's kind of the same as the last question, but I was just basically going to ask, there's been a lot of different sort of things, whether today is the same as the 60s or not, different traces of mind of that we trying to take up or reject, whether that's like, deep politics or whether there was a work to do or not. I basically just to sort of frame your closing remarks, I'll just ask, was 1968 itself that year a turning point? Toby talked at the beginning about the New Left of the 1950s and how that was different from the New Left of the protest movement later on. Was 1968 the end of something, the start of something? Was it a turning point, basically? And maybe we'll go from Toby back to Jackson.
Okay. Sorry, could you read it? Sorry, what?
Was 1968 a turning point?
So I know everybody's probably got a really sore bum when you want to go. We've been here for a long time. I'll keep my thoughts brief. So I think it was a turning point. I think to relate it to the present, there were so many similarities between what happened in 68 and afterwards in today in terms of economic crisis. Then it becomes a cost of living crisis. People are hurting in their pockets. But then back in the past, there was a basic class analysis, and so unions, even though they were reforms, got together under trying to defend people's living standards. So they had a basic class analysis, and this drew people in. And they were largely effective at stopping that tremendous swing towards the capitalist class that happened in the 80s. And they kind of blocked it in the 70s through so much mass action and political strikes, the general strike, committee strike, all these overturning of the government's work controls. So that's one key difference. I think one absolutely key difference between now and then is that they were coming out of a period of an exceptional long boom where most workers had job security, was full employment, people's living standards were largely going up. and then it switches, and then they rebel, of course, right? But today we're coming out of a long period where people's living standards have been declining, and they're getting worse, and since this long recession we're in currently now, and now we've got fascism on the horizon. And so we're almost returning to the 1920s and 1930s, as Graham talked about. And I think that's a real danger. That in the 70s, you had lots of dictatorships around the world coming in trying to stop the left, any overthrows. But today, I think it's far more dangerous because of that, of a really organised right-wing, far-right that's setting the agenda. And so to combat that's really important with, I think, class politics. The second thing I want to stress is that please do read about the New Left. If you haven't heard of people like an E.B. Thompson or Bruce Jesson, or even in this country another person would be Wolfgang Rosenberg, who's the father of Bill Rosenberg. He wrote a number of sort of a social democrat, but also Marxist, influenced economist. Another one with Bert Roth, he was in part of the New Left, early New Left. He wrote many history books. Read The Republican by Bruce Jesson, which was a forum for the left, or read Papers, was you mentioned. It's amazing the level of understanding. They were debating many of the same things that we were debating. Māori issues in Republican was this flourishing debate about Māori nationalism, as they call it, and Māori sovereignty. So please do get into the New Left because I learned a lot from it, a hell of a lot from it. Even though it's something of the past, it's all came out from it. But thank you for coming.
Thank you, Toby. I've really appreciated being part of a panel with some expertise on the New Left because I am not. And I'm not going to answer the prompt question of was it a turning point in 1968. I think that has been thoroughly answered. I'm instead going to answer it's now a turning point, and it is. I think we have no choice but to make it a turning point. As Toby said, that we're not in a place where we're following a boom of any kind. A lot of people's situations are really fucking dire, and yes, if not now, when? We've got to make it a turning point. And there is hope.
It was a turning point because we now live in a fundamentally different world than we did in the 1970s, and we probably need to reckon with that.
Do you have any more thoughts on that?
No, not really. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll conclude there. Thank you to all our panelists who did a big part. If you want to hang around and continue the conversation without sore legs, once we're packed up here, we're going to head over to Southern Cross, the pub just down the road. So meet us there.
Bar on the corner.
Yeah, but we didn't think it would be big enough.
That's where I'm going.
And also, like I said, there's a sign-up sheet for the Panelist mail list over in there. There's also, I forgot to mention, there's a whole of our publication, the Platypus Review, over on the counter, so grab one on your way out. And thank you all for coming.
Nice to see you, Amal.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.